In almost 50 years since the release of Ridley Scott's classic, with 38 licensed Alien games behind us, there really is tragically little to write home about. For sure, older gamers like to tout the insanely tense gameplay of AVP2 with its inspired narrative beats, like experiencing the life cycle of a facehugger, chestburster and full xenomorph from an alien's perspective. But when you're talking about one of cinema's most loved and acclaimed sci-fis, having to turn to a 20-year-old crossover "Kill me" is a bit of a joke. And if 30 years of game makers struggling to reproduce that iconic experience can tell us one thing, it's that it's not an easy experience to recreate. And then, 10 years ago, Alien Isolation arrived and dared to capture the film's slow-burning tension and unmistakable visual essence. And despite critical opinions varying wildly, the one thing everybody agreed on was that it nailed the tone and aesthetic, earning it praise as the first true homage to Alien. No doubt many players appreciated it without ever watching the film. Seeing Alien is by no means a prerequisite to enjoying Isolation, but just like Dark Descent, knowing the film massively enriches the experience by weaving a whole extra layer into the fabric of the game that the developers very much intended you to enjoy. In particular, its first-person format does make it very accessible to most gamers, and it works very well because in the film we experience the adventure through Ripley, who incidentally was described in the script only by name and not as male or female, because the character is supposed to serve as an avatar through which we, the audience, experience the terrifying journey firsthand. Similarly, we experience Isolation through the eyes of her daughter, Amanda, firsthand, making the game's roots equally grounded in horror. By design, the experience makes you feel helpless, with a gameplay loop that consists of making repeated fatal mistakes again and again, leaving you in a state of constant anxiety, which is the mark of a true horror experience. And so, as well conceived as it might be, the experience simply isn't for everyone, which arguably is an achievement because that was the exact same challenge that the movie faced with global audiences. However, 7 years after Alien rewrote the rules on sci-fi, an ambitious indie director with only a couple of films to his name, one of them being the box office flop Piranha Part 2, would somehow convince the producers to let him be the one to rework the franchise into a more accessible action-orientated format. With nothing to prove his worth beyond some bold ideas and the success of his low-budget film Terminator, a young James Cameron would use this film to be his first true stepping stone toward a reputation that would become Titanic.
The ship will sink.
Boom, pun intended. The original Alien had debuted in cinemas just 2 years after Star Wars, and with it brought a very different vision of space, and so its impact was massive. But despite presenting a future of spaceships, cyborgs, and colonies amongst the stars, it actually revealed only the tiniest snippets of each, mostly isolating the crew to an old junket in space, and limiting them to industrial tools and their wits, which is the essence that Alien Isolation so successfully built on. Cameron, on the other hand, managed to succeed in preserving both the aesthetic and the tone, but focused on raising the stakes by multiplying the alien menace and then countering the insanely amplified threat with a military force armed with futuristic firepower.
We got tactical smart missiles, phased plasma pulse rifles, RPGs, we got sonic electronic ball breakers.
Gung-ho Marines in modern camo rocked overpowered and chunkier parodies of today's ballistic weaponry, sported space-age technology hidden behind primitive digital displays, and traveled in spacefaring vehicles powered by conventional and unassuming-looking jets. The tone is absolutely seeped in an unmistakable 80s aesthetic, channeling hard-edged futurism. Incidentally, if you are enjoying this video, then a like or a subscribe is so useful to me, so I would be very, very grateful. Thank you very much. Alright, plug over, back to the video. Arguing which film is better is a fool's errand that's fueled nerd debates for decades, with the original having broken new ground and arguably being the finest cinema, and the second being one of the most thrilling action rompers of all time. Yet it's still interesting to note that audience voting on IMDb lists both movies in the top 250 ever made, and places the original a fraction above its sequel, whereas the average critic score that's shown on Rotten Tomatoes actually ranks them in reverse. The true magic of Aliens, though, is that it doesn't undo anything from the first. Cameron simply opened Pandora's box and revealed what had once been left to the imagination, introducing a wealth of lore and content so revered that you'd be forgiven for assuming that it had arrived with the original. Where Alien left the mysterious creature unnamed, Aliens established it as the infamous xenomorph, and added the monstrous queen too. Where Alien made use of a very limited soundtrack, Aliens boasted an epic one, and where Alien won just one Oscar, Aliens won two. And so, where Alien Isolation is the only game to have ever truly captured the slow-burning, isolationist horror of the first, Alien's Dark Descent is the only game that has ever truly reproduced the hard-edged futurism and frantic, action-centric experience of the second. And like Isolation, it's not without its foibles, but we'll circle back round to those. Now, the elephant in the room is that squad-based games aren't for everyone, and while that might be a hurdle for some, I cannot overstate how integral the isometric squad-controlled style of gameplay is for harnessing the Aliens atmosphere.
Stay frosty, Marines.
And that's because, in the same way that Aliens increased the threat, it also increased the protagonists. This is no longer just Ripley's story as she spends much of her time alongside the commander, providing radio support to the Marines. And in the game, you don't technically play as the Marines either.
You did good today, Administrator.
You play as the commander,
Good job, squad. Joining you now.
who cruises around the level in an armoured APC, serving as a live evac point or fire support, using a pair of automated rotary cannons on the roof that blast xenomorphs into acidy chunks at pretty much any range the moment they're sighted. Most of the time, however, you'll be tracking them as they push further and deeper into the fog of war to reveal gigantic and richly detailed levels that do an immense job of bringing the world to life, much of which can go by unnoticed if you keep the camera up for tactical awareness. But whenever you do zoom in, and the grimy tech and flickering monitors that line the walls around you burst into life, sometimes you'll marvel at how good it looks up close. And yet the scale of these areas are massive, so much so that tactical retreats to restock and recover are an intended part of the gameplay loop. And when you return in the following days, the level will remain just as you left it, save for a few eerie touches like a missing mine here or an open door there, which is all reflective of a world that remains active even when you're not present.
You looking for a nice spot for a picnic or what?
Derelict colonies filled with worn industrial sectors and the bleak intimacy of abandoned living quarters mark the early stages, descending through mines and cavernous regions that reveal the overwhelming scale of planet-cracking machinery below. And as you pursue your objectives, the hunt for answers will carry you deeper into military complexes.
Safe position taken.
And rain-beaten industrial yards, hiding sealed containment wings and ominous lab complexes beneath. And onwards you'll march, the set pieces escalating in cinematic flair that, while original, never stray too far from the design brief, moving you through the abandoned streets of futuristic cities and down the cold, clinical corridors of Weyland-Yutani's towering corporate megastructures, and that really is just to name a few. And the Marines are all here too, whose classes and upgrades serve as the game's RPG layer, offering a dynamic mix of skill sets like the gunner who can rain hell with the M56 smart gun, or the recon who can eliminate at range, or the techer with a droid that can safely scope out terrain, and so on. But a hand-picked squad won't be enough though, because military ops rarely go as planned, and in keeping with its cinematic counterpart, you'll need to contend with your squaddies succumbing to stress even more than wounds.
Sergeant, stop! Get the fuck out of here!
Things like getting stalked or intense combat can trigger a spike, and reducing it means taking meds or welding yourself in a safe room where you can recoup and save the game.
I think we lost them.
Fail to spot a soldier tip over the edge, which is easy to do when things are hectic.
Drone spotted. Light him up!
And the result can be anything from combat penalties and odd behaviour through to handicaps like fear of fire on future missions. Unfortunately, these can be countered back at base, but it means time spent in psychiatric care between missions, on top of medical treatment for wounds.
Marine unconscious!
So as you proceed through missions, this will constantly deny you of your full roster, and this need to cycle through squad combinations is one of the clever ways that the game keeps combat fresh, because it constantly forces you to tackle levels in new ways. Now, if you're still not sure about the squad-based aspect, then there is one thing that the game has in its favour in that respect, and that's that you're not expected to control individual squad members even if you wanted to. You command the unit as a single entity, and when you dish out a command, the game auto-assigns the most appropriate squaddie to the task. If you're asking for something simple like searching a box, then the nearest one will peel away and return when it's done, and if you click search on multiple items in the room, you'll see your squad scatter and knock out the tasks as quickly as they can. On the other hand, specialist abilities like firing a sniper shot or placing a mine
Mine's activated.
become available depending on what gear individual soldiers are carrying or what class of soldier they are, and so instead of using ammo, these abilities just tap into a shared pool of command points that refill over time. And with everything at your disposal bundled together in one quick access list, it means that you don't need to track individual soldiers, you just remember the layout of your hotbar, and the squad figures out the logistics of getting it done.
Who else wants some?
And this turns them into a living, breathing unit that bark orders and offer words of support to one another, just like in the movie.
Usually, they don't do that. Focus, Marines. It's a Praetorian.
Now, the Marines aren't privy to an alien's line of sight path like you are, and so coordinating their movements is key to avoiding fatal mistakes,
Hurry up, squad!
along with keeping enough command points in reserve for when things go sideways, and never neglecting to place down defensive measures when you're sitting on a full stack. Once triggered, the Xenomorphs are unrelenting, and combat is never a sure thing, so progression doesn't mean defeating them, it means moving through their space and surviving them, making the tactical approach to avoid them wherever possible, and taking care to always see them before they see you. And this is what results in that careful, tension-heavy crawl through the environment, which is such a major part of replicating the movie's atmosphere. Tools to take out aliens silently do come later, but from the start to the end, your most valuable tool will be the iconic motion tracker. And between all the ominous sounds, like steam hissing through the floor or nearby scraping in the vents, nothing is more chilling, and the game really does do an outstanding job of building dread, because Xenomorphs aren't nearly as scary when you see them as they are when you don't. Ironically though, the more attuned to the tracker you become, the greater source of comfort it brings, because in time you'll be learning to place enemies in the dark as you hunker down and estimate their positions, while they're stalking up and down unseen corridors or passing by black spots on the other sides of walls. And with all the time you spend focusing on it, you'll be hearing this thing in your sleep. Of course, missteps are absolutely inevitable,
It's seen us!
and if you fail to break the line of sight by the time that the viewing line reaches you,
Safe position taken. Bring them down! Ah! Burn! It burns!
the nail-biting tension is instantly swapped with a hair-raising scramble as you attempt to fall back to any suitable location where you can throw together a hasty defense and bed down.
Move! Move!
And make no mistake, once triggered, making a stand against the Horde is non-negotiable, because every alien in the vicinity and more converge on the last place they heard gunfire.
Looks like they found us! Eat that, fuckers!
And this is what allows for the game's cleverly designed aim mechanic to shine. Your soldiers target, shoot, and reload with complete autonomy at all times, freeing you up to focus on battle tactics. And two essential commands you'll rely on from the start will be assigning a soldier to lay down covering fire, which creates a cone that slows the aliens by half,
Suppressive fire!
and to throw down a flare, which lights up the targets and increases hit chance. And so while funneling your enemies through a kill zone as you attack from a stationary position is the best way to maximize your resources, shooting while moving doesn't actively penalize you either. It simply means that flares and suppression become impractical. It's such a clever design because the devs successfully laid the foundations necessary to organically simulate the same thrilling scenarios made famous by the movie.
Kill that bastard! Watch out! Ah!
Coming out of the goddamn wall! Look!
So while it'll always be your mistake that triggers these random moments of combat, time and again you'll experience your team retreating down flickering corridors amidst thunderous gunfire, shouts of support between teammates,
Okay, let's go nuts!
and the vicious screams of aliens as they're cut down by your Marines. All the while you're screaming into your metaphorical mouthpiece as you throw down precious command points, directing your squad to spread walls of fire or unleash devastating ordnance to wipe out chunks of the corridor as they continue their retreat.
Hoorah!
Not every fight starts with a mistake though, and so there'll be plenty of occasions where remaining stealthy just doesn't seem very likely, and so the strategic play is to alert the Horde and bring them to you, and these moments are generally some of the most thrilling points in the game.
Shit! We've got incoming!
You like that, huh?
Having time to prepare is an entirely different scenario from bedding down, because you're not so limited on command points, and so aside from laying traps, it also gives you the luxury of strategizing over the placement of the only other item in your toolkit more iconic than the motion tracker.
Deploying sentry gun.
Those being your automated sentry guns.
Sentry activated. Light him up!
These things function so similarly to their cinematic counterparts, it is chilling. As is how many times you'll find yourself staring at the digital counter as it gets way too close to zero.
Guns down to 20. 10.
Check your vitals.
The turrets will shred all enemies in their path without mercy, but they take the same ammo that your marines use, which is a finite resource, and so tossing up whether or not you should dump the remaining rounds and fit a fresh clip between fights will cause you more anxiety than facing the aliens ever will.
Packing sentry gun.
Because reloading mid-battle loses you both a turret and a soldier for a few vital seconds, which can make all the difference. They do have a focused field of fire, which means studying the surroundings in order to decide how to place and overlap them becomes a science. Ultimately though, however you're facing them, ensuring the xenomorphs don't encroach on your squad and tear into them is the name of the game. Annihilating the Horde one sector at a time does sound like a safe way to progress, but you can't actually rely on this tactic too often though, because where your ammo is limited, the Horde isn't, and this is matched to a rather ingenious aggressiveness meter, which rises like a digital thermometer every time combat kicks off, and it'll keep rising until you find a way to hide from them, which you have to do because the higher the aggression, the more aliens you'll find patrolling the level, which makes navigating way harder, and it also means the periodic appearance of deadlier aliens, some of which will track you down, and so unless you want to be cornered without enough ammo to fight your way out, it'll mean a mad dash to the nearest evac so you can return to base and recover. Now the base itself is easily one of the best management layers I've seen in years, which I know is subjective and it's not something everybody would agree with, but I don't care because I absolutely loved it.
New objectives are awaiting your review.
But before we get there, the build-up deserves credit, because before there's even a hint of squad combat, the game seamlessly folds a mandatory exposition and a tutorial level into an immersive and haunting introduction without you even realizing. You begin the story as a second-in-command of a Weyland-Yutani ship, overseeing the interstellar shipping lanes and dealing with lies and corruption before you've even set foot in the level.
Director Price?
Isn't here!
That prompts the Overseer to go and investigate, and that's where you take control.
I don't care what McDonald says, something is wrong here.
Learning the mechanics as she moves deeper into the Hornet's nest. Past the carnage and debris until she comes face to face with H.R. Geiger's animated nightmare.
I can stop them.
In an attempt to suppress the alien threat, she triggers a quarantine protocol.
I am so sorry.
That kills hundreds, but results in her, along with a handful of military personnel, planetside in a beached ship, at the wrong end of an orbital space cannon with a fast-burning fuse. The setup is amazing because it's refreshingly human, mistakes are made, tensions are high, and it feels every bit like something that belongs in an Aliens movie.
You want to send a message? Get out and start walking already.
There has to be something we can do.
Maybe there is, but I'm not seeing it.
Despite conflicting agendas, the characters come together with a shared goal of repairing the ship, rounding up any survivors, and finding a way to bypass the quarantine, and eventually escape the planet, which leads to the Overseer stepping into an Overseer role, transforming what might have been a soulless menu interface into a charming interactive experience that sees her stroll into different areas of the ship as you toggle between them.
I don't want to seem unwelcoming, but I don't really have time to talk right now.
I can't tell you how glad I am to see another Weyland-Yutani face aboard.
Sorry, but I'm pretty busy right now. Crash buckled half the support bulkhead.
Sometimes triggering narrative segments which progress the internal stories and help breathe life into the ship's various backgrounds.
This lab has a containment cell built for such encounters.
A live specimen? On board?
Absolutely not. I'll let you get on.
but more often allowing you to manage your squad or spend resources on upgrades and actions as you see fit.
What brings you to my corner of the Otago?
And it's exactly this sort of attention to the player experience that sets the game apart, never afraid to throw off-piste missions at you where it swaps your squad out for a single character in order to inject cinematic weight into the otherwise flat backdrops. Which is a cheap trick for sure, but it's incredibly effective, as you'll never see a background the same way again once you've snuck through it unarmed with an alien on your tail. Objectively, your goals include harvesting the doomed planet for replacement ship parts, recruiting engineering and medical personnel who can speed up the repair of your ship and the recovery time of your marines respectively, and pursuing narrative-related objectives. The main story starts by loosely moving you toward bypassing the quarantine, but before long spirals into winding stories with deadly antagonists that tap into all the best parts of the Aliens franchise, from Weyland-Yutani Corp loyalists and their well-armed mercenary dogs, to glitching cyborgs,
I'm afraid I can't permit that.
and alien hives,
Flamethrower, move!
Shit!
to insane alien-obsessed cultists known as Darwin Era, and these fanatical antagonists in particular serving as the game's main home-brewed human threat.
Brothers, I'm hit!
Introduced as a mysterious cult kidnapping colonists, and in time leading you on a trail of shady biological experiments and disturbing hybrids that give your marines a whole new threat to contend with. And through all of this, you uncover tales of intrigue and espionage and corporate wrongdoings that escalate toward a massive finale that is about as epic as you'd imagine for an Aliens movie. Now, there's just no way you can round off talking about Dark Descent without talking about the frustrations, most of which appear on the console port and really come down to the fact that the team was small and had a limited budget. The most obvious is probably the voiceovers, which the pre-port PC version obviously suffers from too.
Move on! Move on! Move! 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 Double time! Double time! Double time! Let's rock! Light them up!
What the hell just happened?
Lift's fracked. Nearly took us with it. We'll need another way out. Told you. Frickin' told you.
Being that there are only 2 males and 2 females to choose from, and it is possible to end up with a whole squad of men or women, which leads to vocal overlap that breaks the character identity.
Might as well look for a needle in a haystack. That's one big lunchroom. They want us to find one?
And add to that the fact that the squad leaders often shout motivational lines during stealth,
Come on, team!
which fortunately can't be heard by anybody but you, but it does create jarring tonal clashes when hunkered in the dark hiding from an alien.
Hurry up, you slugs! Hurry up, squad! Come on, team!
But the mechanic that stands out as the most frustrating is probably the sniper, who can only take a headshot when they have line of sight.
Got you in my sights. Oh yeah!
And despite being called the recon marine, will often be hovering at the back when you most need them, meaning that if any alien spots a squad member, the easiest way to force the shot is to pull your team back, and then open the turret placement, switch to your recon, drop a turret and then make him rush forwards, and then cancel the placement, and then while exposed, have him raise his rifle and fire off the shot. Reddit confirms that this is in fact the preferred technique of the masses and something you'll learn to do with your eyes shut, but is a typical relic of a PC port where the original mouse design offered a lot more granular control. The thing is, despite distracting from some of the game's strongest moments, these quirks either become tolerable over time or simply manifest as an obstacle that needs bypassing. Really though, we need to talk about the bugs.
Got you in my sights. You like that, huh?
And I hate to have to do this because I don't want to level any negativity at the game, but most often when people do, this is what tops the list. Many PC players report entire runs without issues, so it probably is the preferred way to play, but not everybody has that option. Some are immersion breaking, like hanging icons or missing string tables appearing on screen, and others are irritating but workable, like being unable to toggle with the R button for no reason, so having to go backward through menus, or placing turrets right before cutscenes can see them destroyed, which is costly enough to your resources that it forces a reload, and others, frankly, are pretty hilarious. The real frustration though is with the bugs that jeopardize the entire mission. A later level saw one of my soldiers go missing mid-level, which required a full level restart. Another time an autosave triggered during an automatic camera pan, and the result was that I couldn't use the shoulder inputs after that, and reloading the save actually preserved the bug, which again forced a complete level restart. So for all the levels that I played, I was actually forced to restart 2 of them, one of them being near the beginning and the other one being near the end. When all is said and done, Aliens Dark Descent is, above else, a masterclass in building tension through atmosphere and consequence, with an unprecedented attention to audiovisual design that does half the work before you even issue a command. The tactical systems keep you engaged and offer a blend of real-time decision-making and long-term planning, but it excels because it treats tactics and atmosphere as two halves of the same experience.
Face it, we're doomed!
And it's rare for both to overstay their welcome simultaneously. And from the moment you step onto a derelict ship and your flashlights sweep across the first dark, dilapidated corridor, or you descend onto the metal walkways of a cavernous refinery and cast your eyes across an ocean of lava pits, the game has already locked you into the addictive rhythm of scanning the environment, inching forward, and listening carefully as you second-guess every sound. The combat loop that allows for both reactive and strategic gameplay is combined with a story level that's leagues better than you'd expect.
What if she's changed and I don't recognize her anymore?
But while failing to provide a human connection with your Marines that goes much deeper than picking their name, appearance, and a reliance on their unique skill set, inversely does succeed in humanizing the support characters with strong and often nuanced writing.
Turns out blowing stuff up's cathartic.
Better than booze, and that's the truth.
On the subject of truth.
And as the original story beats continue to roll in and force the ragtag crew to face off against increasingly epic odds, it builds an unexpectedly strong emotional bond that'll keep drawing you back to the game until you've seen the cinematic journey through to its conclusion.
Hello there, good looking. Might I have this dance?
The gameplay experience is thrilling, as are many games, but when supported by the narrative, the overall experience achieves something that's seen far less often, and that is that it's memorable. The frustrations do undermine its best qualities, with the limited voice actors jarring when out of place, and the squad control is conceptually very strong, but suffers from its own simplicity by being too rigid at times, and the bugs that periodically crop up on the PlayStation port can sometimes impede your progress and undo some of the game's most compelling moments. But here's the thing, the fanbase is legion. The number of players who took these issues in their stride and just pushed on is huge, and as one of them, I can tell you that this is perhaps the greatest testament to the game's brilliance, because in spite of the frustrations, I played on, and there are a lot of games that I wouldn't have done that for. The issues couldn't stop me, I enjoyed it too much, and after I stopped playing, it left a void in my life. I'm not joking when I say I started hearing the tracker around me. The dishwasher in our kitchen has a subtle squeak that I'd never picked up on, and for days some neuron in my brain would fire every time I walked past and give me an adrenaline spike, which told me how completely tuned into the game I was, and pretty much nothing has had that much impact on me since I played Subnautica. Yes, it is restricted in some ways, but it's also the most ambitious and heartfelt tribute to Cameron's movie ever made, and passion projects like this just don't get made all that often. Games that don't just recreate how a cinematic experience looked and sounded, but how it felt.
Got something on the tracker.
It captures the dread and camaraderie of the movie's Marines and recreates it in-game with fidelity and sincerity, and it wraps it all in an authentic standalone story that feels connected to both the larger world and the hour-by-hour gameplay. The bugs are unavoidable, but they're forgivable, if only because as a fan of the franchise or of atmospheric tactical games with a survival edge in general, most of the time while it's playing well, it's a milestone game in the Alien franchise that raises the immersion bar to new heights, and as second-hand copies can be purchased for next to nothing these days. If you have any love for the movie at all, passing it by would be a mistake.
And someone needs to know.
If the bugs do put you off, however, then I did a video on They Are Billions a little while ago, and that is a streamlined strategy purist's wet dream, so I'd recommend giving that a try instead. And if you wouldn't mind giving this video a like or even a sub, I would be so grateful. And as always, thanks for watching, peace out, and hope to see you next time.